There is a sentence in the Talmud that creates a problem nobody seems to have properly addressed. The sentence is in the tractate Berakot, chapter 5, section 1. Anyone who recites the Shema on his bed, it is as if he holds a double-edged sword in his hand to protect himself from demons. That is explicit, that is not metaphor, not poetry, not allegorical language. The greatest rabbinical minds in history, men who spent their entire lives interrogating every word of the tradition, wrote that a specific spoken word before sleep functions as a weapon against what they understood as real spiritual adversaries. A double-edged sword, precise, military, functional, a technology for the threshold of sleep. Now here is the problem. The Shema, the declaration from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, that is the most fundamental passage in all of Judaism, that text was not available to Solomon. The book of Deuteronomy was, according to 2 Kings chapter 22, physically found in the temple under King Josiah in 621 BCE. Josiah, who reigned long after Solomon. The scholars, Jacob Milgram, Geoffrey Tigay, both understood Deuteronomy as a text crystallized under the late monarchy, more than 3 centuries after Solomon built his temple and slept in his palace. Solomon could not have recited the Shema before sleep. It did not exist. So when the Talmud connects the nightly recitation of a divine word to protection against spirits, and when every serious reader of that tradition traces the origin of that practice to the king who bound and commanded those very spirits, the question is not merely interesting. The question becomes, what was Solomon actually saying? What was the word, the real word, that he spoke each night at the threshold of sleep, because he was saying something, and it was not the Shema? I want to show you exactly how to find it, not by speculation, by elimination. Remove everything that postdates Solomon, the Psalter, most of it compiled and edited well after his time, the formal prayer structures of the Second Temple period, the liturgical formulas of the rabbis, the Shema itself. Remove everything the historical record tells us was not available to a 10th century BCE king of Israel. What remains? Something much older than prayer. Something that predates every structure, every liturgy, every formalized worship that later generations built on top of it. The thing that remains is a name, a single divine name. And there is a text that points directly to it. There is a document called the Testament of Solomon. In the form we have it now, it was written somewhere between the 1st and 5th centuries of the Common Era. The surviving manuscripts are in Greek, but the scholars who study it most carefully, Dennis Dewling, who produced the standard academic translation, argue that the tradition behind it reaches back into the Second Temple period, and likely further. What the Testament of Solomon does is record Solomon interrogating demons, one by one. Each demon is brought before him. Each reveals its name, its nature, what it does to human beings, and what divine name or force has power over it. Systematically, like a physician cataloging illnesses and their cures, and the same word keeps appearing, not once or twice. Across multiple chapters, multiple interrogations, multiple demons, the same divine name surfaces again and again as the one before which spirits yield. In chapter 18, when Solomon interrogates Beelzebul, prince of demons, the answer invokes the same name. In the interrogation of the spirits of the winds, the same name. And in the Greek Magical Papyri, the PGM series, texts preserved from Greco-Roman Egypt, spanning the 1st through 5th centuries of the Common Era, one of the richest collections of ancient protective practice in existence, this name appears more frequently than any other divine name in protective contexts. More than Adonai, more than Elohim, more than El Shaddai, the name is Sabaoth, in Hebrew, Tzvaot, Lord of hosts, Lord of armies, the name of God in his capacity as commander of the invisible armies. That is the word. Now I want to explain why this specific name and not any other. Because the Hebrew tradition does not have one name for God. It has many, each carrying a different capacity, a different function, a different face of the divine. Elohim is the creator God, the one who speaks worlds into being, used in the opening of Genesis, in the architecture of existence itself. El Shaddai is the God of sustenance, of provision, of the covenant made in the wilderness. The name Abraham heard, the name of divine nurture and protection of the chosen. Adonai is the name of lordship, of personal relationship, the name substituted for the unpronounceable YHWH in daily speech, the name of intimate access. But Tzvaot, Sabaoth, is none of these things. Tzvaot is the name of God and his role as commander of armies, not metaphorical armies. The armies the ancient world understood as operating in a parallel domain to human warfare. The angels, the spiritual forces, the invisible powers that the book of Job, the book of Daniel, and the prophets describe moving behind the visible events of history. This is a military title, General of the Unseen Forces. When you need protection from your spouse, you call your family. When you need protection from a neighbor, you call the police. When you need protection from the invisible world, you call the name of the one who commands it. Solomon understood this. Every name has a jurisdiction, and Tzvaot is the jurisdiction that covers what he was guarding against at the threshold of sleep. Tzvaot is not a general title for God. It carries a specific function. The word first appears in Scripture in 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 3. Hannah goes to the tabernacle at Shiloh to pray for a son, and the text says she prays to YHWH Tzvaot, the Lord of hosts. The location matters. Shiloh was the sacred military site, the place where the Ark of the Covenant resided before it was taken, the place most associated, in early Israelite understanding, with God's power over the armies of heaven, the angels, the invisible forces that fought battles no human eye could see. By the time Solomon built his temple, the name YHWH Tzvaot had acquired a very specific meaning. It was the name of God as commander of the armies of the unseen world. Solomon would have known this name the way a general knows the names of armies. The spiritual forces were under it. The invisible hierarchy was organized by it. And when the Testament of Solomon records demons recoiling before it, being bound, losing their power, it is describing exactly what the name meant. Lord of armies, the name by which God commanded what Solomon himself had learned to command. Solomon, at the threshold of sleep, was not offering a prayer. He was invoking a military title. He was declaring, before he crossed into the vulnerability of unconsciousness, whose armies held the space he was about to enter. I need to tell you about a specific afternoon in the British Museum. I was 44 years old. I was in the Special Collections reading room, working on microfilm of the Greek Magical Papyri. My task was to trace how the Solomonic tradition had traveled through Coptic Egypt into early Christian protective practice. I had a paper ledger. I was counting occurrences of divine names in protective contexts, the formulas used to keep spirits away, to seal a space, to guard a sleeper. About 3 hours in, I noticed something that made me stop and go back to the beginning of my count. Sabaoth. It was everywhere. More than Adonai. More than any other divine name. In context after context, protection, exorcism, the warding of a space before sleep, the word that appeared most frequently, with the most consistent purpose, was Sabaoth. I sat back from the microfilm reader. The room was almost empty, late afternoon light coming through the high windows, the particular silence of a place where people go to handle very old things. And I thought, this name had traveled from Hebrew into Greek, from Palestine into Egypt, from Jewish practice into Coptic Christian practice. Nobody had issued a directive. Nobody had organized a curriculum. Nobody had said, this is the word you use. The name had moved on its own. It moved because it worked, because people who needed protection found it in manuscripts, in oral traditions, in the practices passed down through families, and they kept it, and they used it, and they passed it on. I checked the Testament of Solomon, Sabaoth again. I checked the earliest Jewish night protection texts, the Psalm 91 amulets, the Magen David formulas. Sabaoth in all of them. A name that did not need institutional support, that did not need a council or a formal transmission. And I thought, if you follow the evidence rather than the official story, you keep arriving at the same place. One word, 3,000 years, moved by its own weight. Now I want to show you something that should not be possible if the word's power were merely cultural. In Sahih al-Bukhari, the most authoritative collection of hadith in Sunni Islam, there is a report attributed to Abu Hurayra, one of the closest companions of the Prophet Muhammad. He was guarding the charitable goods of Ramadan. 3 nights in a row, a figure appeared and began stealing. Abu Hurayra caught him each time. On the 3rd night, the figure finally offered something in exchange for release. The Prophet later told Abu Hurayra that was a demon. And what the demon had revealed under pressure on that 3rd night, the protective word it gave him in exchange for freedom, was Ayat al-Kursi, Quran chapter 2, verse 255. Recite it before you sleep, the demon said, and God will appoint a guardian over you, and Satan will not come near you until morning. Now listen to the structure of what just happened. A demon was caught. A demon was interrogated. Under pressure, the demon revealed the formula that neutralizes its kind. This is the Testament of Solomon, not in a Jewish manuscript, not in a Solomonic text, in an Islamic hadith. The mechanism is identical across traditions. A spiritual adversary under pressure reveals the word that protects against it. And Ayat al-Kursi is not a prayer in the petitionary sense. It is a declaration of divine sovereignty, a statement of who holds the ground: God, the living, the self-sustaining, Lord of the heavens and earth, Lord of armies, both seen and unseen. The Islamic tradition preserved the same mechanism Solomon used. It did not copy it. It arrived at it independently, through the same fundamental logic. Ask a demon what stops it. It will tell you. And what it tells you is always a name of authority, never a request, always a declaration. And a 3rd stream, not Hebrew, not Arabic, West African. In Yoruba tradition, there is a practice at the threshold of the home, specifically at the doorway, the liminal crossing point. The Yoruba distinguish carefully between Orin, the sustained petition, the song that asks, and the spoken name at the threshold. The spoken name at the threshold is not prayer, it is declaration. You speak the name of the guardian at the crossing point, not to petition, not to request, to assert who holds authority at the boundary. My mother was Igbo from the Suka, and the Igbo tradition has its own version of this. The spoken name of Chi, the personal divine guardian, at the doorway before sleep. Not a prayer addressed to Chi, a declaration to the invisible world that Chi is present, that this person is accompanied, that the threshold is not unguarded. My mother never used the word Sabbath. She had never read the Testament of Solomon. She did not know about the Greek Magical Papyri, but she stood at the doorway. She spoke, once, and crossed. 3 traditions, Hebrew, Islamic, Igbo, and Yoruba, West African. None of them coordinated. All 3 arriving at the same architecture. A name, not a prayer. A declaration, not a petition. Spoken once at the threshold, before crossing into sleep. The repetition, all 3 traditions understood, changes the nature of the act. To say the name 3 times, 7 times, that is prayer, that is asking. To say it once is to assert. Solomon did not petition. He had bound those spirits. He knew their names and their weaknesses. He had interrogated them in his court one by one. Every night he reminded them. One word, once, at the door. Let me explain why it matters that it is a name rather than a prayer. In the Hebrew understanding of language, the understanding that runs through every text Solomon studied, a name is not a label. A name is an ontological reality. To speak the name of something is to invoke the thing itself. When God speaks light into being in Genesis, the creation is not metaphorical. The speech is the act. The word and the thing it names are one in the moment of speaking. Prayer is different. Prayer is petition. Prayer acknowledges distance. The supplicant is here, the divine is elsewhere, and the prayer is the communication crossing that distance. When Solomon spoke at the threshold of sleep, the rabbis did not record it as prayer. They recorded the act with a word for declaration. He was not asking, he was posting a sign. Adonai Tzvaot. That name holds this space. Not, please protect me. That name governs here. The difference is the difference between a soldier asking his commander for help and a soldier announcing to the enemy which commander's forces hold the ground. Solomon was not asking for protection. He was already protected. He was making that protection official. Now let me tell you exactly what the practice is. Because Solomon's method, as I understand it from these texts, is not a ritual in the religious sense, it is an architectural act. You stand at the threshold of your sleeping space, not inside the room, at the door, at the ceiling point, the same architectural point where the mezuzah was later understood to seal the home. The mezuzah contains a divine name on the doorpost. Solomon's practice is the spoken version of the same principle, not the passive written inscription, but the active spoken declaration. You face the room you are about to enter, and you say the name once, aloud, not silently. Adonai Tzvaot. If you prefer Lord of Hosts, Lord of Armies. The Hebrew carries more weight, not because Hebrew is magic, but because when you speak a name that people have been speaking for 3,000 years in exactly this context, you speak into a stream of accumulated intention that has its own force. But the meaning carries, the declaration carries. You are not asking for protection, you are asserting sovereignty. This space tonight is under the authority of the Lord of Armies. Then you cross the threshold. You have done what Solomon did. One word. Once. At the door. Consider the nature of what Solomon was confronting. The Testament of Solomon is not primarily a spiritual text. It is, in its own strange way, a military document. Solomon built an empire. He commanded human armies. But the Testament records that his authority extended into a parallel domain, the unseen world, the spiritual forces the ancient world understood as real as any earthly power. He bound Asmodeus. He interrogated the spirits of the air and the earth and the fire. He commanded them the way a general commands subordinates. And in a military command structure, when you enter a space and declare authority, when you seal a perimeter, you do not say a prayer. You invoke the name of the authority that holds the ground. Solomon at night, crossing into sleep, when his consciousness became vulnerable, when his will relaxed its grip, would have done exactly what the Testament records him doing during the day. Invoked the divine name that holds authority over the armies of the unseen. Adonai Tzvaot. That is still here. This space is still held. I am going into sleep, but the name remains at the threshold. When you go to your room tonight, before you cross the threshold, stand at the door, face the space. Say the name once, not 3 times, not 7, once as a declaration, then cross. You have done what Solomon did, not as ceremony, not as superstition, not as the repetition of a ritual you do not understand, as the assertion of something that is already true. The space is held. The name is there. Because what strikes me after all these years with these manuscripts, the thing that keeps striking me, is how simple it is. Solomon had 700 wives, a court of extraordinary complexity, the management of the most powerful kingdom in the region, and every night, at the threshold of sleep, he did one thing. One word, once. The simplest possible act. Not because the problem was small, because he understood that the threshold of sleep does not require a ceremony, it requires a declaration. And the declaration requires only one thing, the name that holds all authority over the ground you are crossing into. 3,000 years of tradition, Hebrew, Islamic, West African, preserved this, without coordination, without a central authority directing the transmission. My mother in Nasuka knew it, the rabbis in Berakot knew it, the hadith preservers in Medina knew it. The name moved on its own, the way true things always move, from hand to hand, from threshold to threshold. Through all the centuries between Solomon's palace and the room you are standing outside of tonight, go to your door. The name is Adonai Tzvaot. Speak it once. Then cross. Sleep well tonight, or perhaps stand at the threshold a moment longer, and consider what you are declaring, and what has always been waiting there for you to acknowledge it.